The night was dark, the sky painted with endless stars, but something unusual cut through the silence. A burning light streaked across the sky like a falling star. Except this star was no ordinary rock. It was a ship crashing down toward the human colony on planet Vega 9. The colony's security forces spotted it immediately. Alarms blared. Unidentified object detected. All units, prepare for impact. The ship crashed just outside the colony's walls, sending dust and fire into the air. The impact shook the ground, making buildings tremble. Within minutes, armed guards surrounded the wreckage, their weapons ready. Could be an enemy scout, one soldier muttered. Or just debris from the old war, another guessed. But when the smoke cleared, they saw something unexpected. Lying among the broken metal and shattered glass was a figure, small, thin, trembling. It was an alien girl, her body covered in strange, silvery scars. Her right leg was twisted unnaturally, her left arm missing just above the elbow. She was alive, barely. One of the guards took a step closer and sneered. "Disgusting. It's one of them." The others nodded in agreement. The alien species had once been a great empire, powerful and feared, but they had lost the war against humanity years ago. Now, they were nearly extinct. And this one, weak, broken, useless. She struggled to move, her glowing purple eyes filled with pain and fear. She tried to speak, but her voice was just a whisper, a language no one wanted to understand. A soldier raised his weapon. "Should we end it? It's better than leaving her to suffer." Before anyone could act, a voice interrupted. "Stop." The soldiers turned to see a man stepping through the crowd. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a mechanic's uniform. His name was Jonas Ward, a simple engineer who fixed colony machinery. He was not a soldier. He was not a leader. But there was something in his eyes, something different. Jonas knelt beside the alien girl, ignoring the disgusted looks from the others. He could see her body trembling, her breath shallow. "She's just a kid," he muttered. One of the guards scoffed. "She's not human." Jonas didn't look up. "She's still alive." The alien girl flinched as he reached toward her. She had seen too much hatred, too much cruelty from his kind. She expected pain. Instead, Jonas gently placed his hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but careful. "You're safe now," he said softly. "I won't let them hurt you." The soldiers exchanged glances. "Jonas, step away. This thing isn't our problem." "She's not a thing," Jonas snapped, his voice sharp. The lead soldier shook his head. "Fine. If you care so much, take her. But don't come crying to us when she turns on you." Jonas didn't argue. He simply lifted the fragile alien girl into his arms, carrying her away from the wreckage. She was light, too light, like she had been starving for weeks. As he walked toward his workshop at the edge of the colony, he felt her fingers tighten weakly around his sleeve. A silent plea. Jonas sighed. Yeah, I got you." What he didn't know was that this single act of kindness would change both of their fates forever. Jonas pushed open the door to his workshop, the dim lights flickering as he stepped inside. The room smelled of metal, oil, and old electronics, a place built for machines, not for fragile, wounded beings. But right now, it was the only safe place he could think of. The alien girl in his arms was barely conscious. Her breath was shallow, her body limp. She had lost too much blood. He laid her down gently on an old workbench, his fingers hesitating as he took in the extent of her injuries. Her leg was mangled beyond repair, and the scars across her body looked old, as if she had been suffering long before the crash. But what struck him most was her face. Not monstrous, not terrifying, just exhausted. Jonas exhaled. "All right, let's see what we can do." He grabbed his medical kit, though he was no doctor. He had fixed broken engines, shattered circuits, and malfunctioning androids. But this was different. The girl stirred as he disinfected a deep wound on her side. Her eyes snapped open, glowing purple in the dim light. She recoiled, fear flashing across her face. Jonas raised his hands. "Hey, easy. I'm just helping." She didn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. Her body remained tense, but she didn't fight as he continued treating her wounds. Outside, the colony was awake, whispers already spreading. The mechanic took it in. Why would he risk his life for an alien? She's dangerous. She doesn't belong here. Jonas knew the colony wouldn't stay quiet for long. People were afraid of what they didn't understand. He had seen it before, years ago, when he himself had been an outsider. He shook the memory away and turned his attention back to the girl. She was watching him now, her gaze sharp despite her weakness. Slowly, she lifted a trembling hand and pointed at his chest. Her lips parted, and she rasped something in her own language, words he couldn't decipher. Jonas frowned. "Yeah, I don't speak that." She struggled, her voice cracking as she repeated the same sound. It took him a moment to realize she wasn't saying a word. She was asking a question. "Why?" Jonas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Why am I helping you?" He paused, then shrugged. "Guess I don't like seeing things thrown away just because they're broken." The alien girl stared at him, processing his words, even if she didn't understand them fully. A loud knock on the workshop door shattered the silence. Jonas tensed. "Open up," a voice demanded. It was the colony's security force. The girl flinched, instinctively curling in on herself, her glowing eyes darting to the door. She knew what was coming. Jonas clenched his jaw. "Stay here." He stepped toward the door, but didn't open it. "What do you want?" "We need to talk." "Jonas, open the door." He didn't move. About. A pause. Then, "You know what?" Jonas glanced over his shoulder. The alien girl was staring at him, her breathing quick and uneven. She had seen this before, this moment, this choice. Every time, it ended the same way. Betrayal. Jonas turned back to the door and exhaled slowly. "I don't know what you're talking about." The silence on the other side of the door stretched long and tense. Then, "You don't want to do this, Jonas. You don't want to be on the wrong side of this." Jonas tightened his fists. "I think I already made my choice." He reached out, turned off the workshop lights, and stepped back. Outside, the security force lingered for a moment longer. Then, footsteps faded into the distance. Jonas released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, but he knew this wasn't over. He turned back to the girl, who was still watching him. Something different in her gaze now. For the first time since she crashed, she didn't look afraid. The workshop was dark, the air thick with tension. Jonas leaned against the door, listening carefully as the colony's security forces moved away. Their footsteps grew fainter, but he knew they weren't gone for good. They'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't just knock. The alien girl, the outcast, watched him in silence, her glowing eyes reflecting the dim light from the workshop's control panel. She had barely moved since he had refused to give her up, but Jonas could see the way her body remained tense, as if she was waiting for the inevitable betrayal. He wasn't sure what to say to her. He had fixed a lot of broken things in his life, but trust, that was a different kind of repair job. Finally, he exhaled. "You got a name." Her lips parted slightly. A soft sound escaped, something alien, something unfamiliar. A name that didn't belong in human language. Jonas frowned. "That's gonna be tough for me to pronounce." He thought for a moment. "How about Nyx?" She blinked, her brows furrowed as she repeated the name, slowly, cautiously. "Nyx." Jonas grinned. "Yeah, that'll do." Nyx stared at him for a long time, as if she was trying to understand why he had given her a name, why he hadn't turned her in. But she didn't ask. Maybe she didn't need to. Jonas grabbed an old military-grade scanner from his workbench and crouched beside her. "All right, let's see how bad the damage is." Nyx flinched slightly as he ran the device over her wounds. The scanner beeped, showing a full display of her internal injuries. Jonas swore under his breath. Her system was failing, not just from the wounds, but from malnutrition, exhaustion, and something else, something deeper. Her body was deteriorating at a cellular level, like she had been fighting a battle long before she ever crashed here. Jonas rubbed his jaw. You need more than stitches and bandages. You need real medical help. Nix stiffened. Jonas knew why. The colony's doctors wouldn't help her. Even if they wanted to, the laws were clear. Aliens weren't allowed to receive human medical treatment. Jonas muttered a curse and shut off the scanner. I'll figure something out. Nix's fingers curled slightly, like she wanted to believe him, but didn't dare to hope. The silence between them stretched. Outside, the colony hummed with distant voices, the occasional sound of hovercrafts moving through the settlement. Time was running out. Jonas stood. You should rest. I'll be back soon. Nix's eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing across her face. Jonas smirked. Relax. I'm not turning you in. He grabbed his coat and headed toward the door. Just as he reached for the handle, a soft voice stopped him. Why? Jonas turned. Nix was staring at him, her expression unreadable, but her voice was steady this time. Stronger. Why are you helping me? Jonas hesitated. He could have given her a simple answer. He could have said, because it's the right thing to do, or because I don't like how the colony treats people like you. But the truth was deeper. He sighed, because I know what it's like to be an outcast. Nix's eyes flickered with something. Understanding. Jonas turned back to the door. Try not to get yourself killed while I'm gone. Then he stepped outside into the cold night, knowing full well that he was risking everything, and knowing he wouldn't turn back. The colony streets were quiet at this hour, but Jonas knew better than to let his guard down. He kept to the shadows, moving swiftly through the alleys, avoiding the security patrols that were still searching for Nix. He had a plan, a reckless, dangerous plan, but it was the only option. Nix wouldn't survive without medical treatment, and there was only one person on the entire colony who might be able to help. Dr. Evelyn Carter. She wasn't just any doctor, she was the best. And more importantly, she was one of the few people in the colony who didn't blindly follow orders. Jonas had worked with her before, back when he still believed in the system, before he realized that some lives were worth more than others in the eyes of the colony's leaders. Jonas reached the back entrance of the medical station and tapped a quiet but firm rhythm against the metal door. A coded knock, one they had used during the war when things needed to stay off the record. Seconds later, a soft click came from the other side. The door cracked open just enough for a pair of sharp green eyes to peer through the gap. Jonas. Evelyn's voice was a mix of surprise and suspicion. What the hell are you doing here? Jonas exhaled. I need your help, and I need you to not ask questions. Evelyn frowned. That's not how this works. Jonas glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one was watching. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. It's not a what, Evie. It's a who. And she's dying. Evelyn's expression darkened. She. Jonas hesitated. She's not human. For a long moment, Evelyn didn't say anything. Then she muttered a curse under her breath and yanked the door open. Get inside. Now. Jonas stepped in, and Evelyn immediately shut the door behind him. The medical station was dimly lit, the sterile scent of antiseptics filling the air. Evelyn folded her arms, giving him a hard look. You know how much trouble I could get in for this, right? Jonas nodded. Yeah, I do. She sighed. Where is she? Jonas didn't answer. He didn't need to. Evelyn already knew he wouldn't have come unless it was serious. She grabbed a med kit and motioned for him to follow. Let's go. By the time they made it back to the workshop, Nix was barely conscious. Her breathing was shallow, her skin even paler than before. Jonas' heart clenched as he knelt beside her. Nix, stay with me. I brought help. Nix's eyes fluttered open, just enough to see Evelyn kneeling beside her, scanning her wounds with practiced efficiency. Evelyn's expression was unreadable, but Jonas knew she was calculating the risks. She wasn't just treating an alien. She was committing treason in the eyes of the colony. Her body's shutting down, Evelyn said, pulling out a vial of serum. I can stabilize her, but she needs more than this. She needs real treatment, and we don't have the equipment here. Jonas clenched his fists. Then tell me what we need. I'll get it. Evelyn hesitated. Jonas, I don't care about the risk. His voice was firm. Just tell me what to do. Evelyn sighed. All right. She pressed the vial against Nex's arm, injecting the serum into her bloodstream. But if we're doing this, we do it my way. No heroics. No getting yourself killed. Jonas smirked. No promises. Evelyn rolled her eyes. Of course not. As Nex's breathing steadied, Jonas felt a small weight lift off his chest. She wasn't safe yet, not even close, but for the first time since he had found her, there was hope. And Jonas wasn't about to let go of it. The tension in the dimly lit workshop was thick enough to cut. Jonas paced the small space, his mind racing through the next steps. Nyx was stable, for now, but Evelyn had made it clear she wouldn't survive without proper medical treatment, and that meant breaking into one of the most secure facilities in the colony. Evelyn stood near Nyx, carefully monitoring her vitals. The alien's breathing had improved slightly, but the strain on her body was evident. Her skin had taken on a dull grayish hue, her usual iridescence fading, a sure sign of internal distress. She needs the regeneration pod, Evelyn finally said, setting down her scanner. Jonas stopped pacing. And where exactly do we find one? Evelyn glanced at him, her lips pressed into a tight line. The colony's medical center. Jonas exhaled sharply. Of course it is. The medical center was the most heavily guarded building in the district, reserved only for the worthy citizens, the elites, the officers, the people whose lives were deemed important. A disabled alien outcast. She wouldn't even be allowed to breathe the same air. Jonas turned to Evelyn. Can you get us in? Evelyn hesitated. I might have access, but it won't be that simple. The second I use my clearance, the system logs it. If we get caught. We won't. Jonas cut her off, determination burning in his eyes. We can't. He glanced at Nyx, who was barely holding on to consciousness. Every second they wasted brought her closer to the edge. Evelyn sighed. I can wipe the logs once we're in, but we'll still have to get past the guards. Jonas cracked his knuckles. I'll handle that. An hour later, the plan was set. The colony operated under strict curfew, but Evelyn's clearance would get them through the outer doors. After that, they were on their own. Jonas adjusted the stolen security uniform he had managed to acquire from an old contact. It wasn't perfect, but in the dark corridors, it would be enough to buy them precious minutes. Evelyn glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Are you sure about this? Jonas nodded. We don't have another choice. Evelyn sighed, then turned to Nyx. All right, let's move. With Nyx barely able to stand, Jonas carefully lifted her onto his back. She was lighter than he expected, her fragile form making him even more aware of just how dire her condition had become. She murmured something in her own language. Soft, weak. Jonas felt a pang in his chest. He had no idea what she had just said, but he understood the meaning. She was scared. So was he. The medical center loomed in the distance, its sleek, sterile walls glowing under the artificial lights. The entrance was guarded, as expected. 2 officers stood at the main doors, their rifles slung over their shoulders. Jonas exhaled. Time for Phase 1. He adjusted his stolen uniform and approached with a confident stride. Act like you belong. That was the trick. One of the guards narrowed his eyes. Haven't seen you before. You knew. Jonas forced a smirk. Yeah, got transferred from Sector C. The guard grunted. Lucky you. This sector's dead tonight. Not much action. Jonas nodded. Just how I like it. He shifted slightly, making sure Nix stayed hidden behind Evelyn, who pretended to check her datavat. The second guard eyed him. Who's she? Jonas tensed, but Evelyn stepped in smoothly. Dr. Evelyn Carter. I have a patient emergency. She held up her clearance badge. You can check the system if you want, but if this patient dies while you waste my time, I'll make sure command hears about it. The guards exchanged glances. Neither of them looked eager to challenge a doctor. Finally, one of them sighed. Fine. Go in. Jonas kept his pace steady as they walked through the doors, resisting the urge to run. They were in. Now came the hard part. Inside, the sterile white halls stretched before them. Jonas kept his head down as Evelyn led the way, swiping through restricted doors. Nix's breathing was shallow against his back, her body barely clinging on. Finally, they'd reached the regeneration pod room. Rows of advanced medical pods lined the walls, each one a miracle of technology, reserved only for those deemed valuable enough. Jonas carefully lowered Nix into one of the pods, his hands shaking slightly. Evelyn worked fast, activating the interface. This will take time. I'll keep the system busy, but we can't stay long. Jonas barely heard her. He was watching Nix, watching as the pod system scanned her failing body. Then, suddenly, the alarm blared. Unauthorized access detected. Jonas' blood turned to ice. They had been found. The guards wouldn't ask questions. They would shoot first. He turned to Evelyn. How fast can you wipe the logs? Evelyn's fingers flew over the screen. Not fast enough. Jonas clenched his fists. He knew what he had to do. He had to buy them time. Without a second thought, he grabbed a weapon from the emergency locker and sprinted towards the entrance. The guards were coming, and Jonas was ready. The hallway outside the medical bay was filled with the heavy sound of boots hitting the ground. Jonas knew they had only seconds before the guards burst in. He took a deep breath, gripping the stolen rifle tightly. His pulse pounded in his ears. Behind him, Evelyn was still working furiously at the console, fingers flying across the screen. The regeneration pod hummed softly as it worked to heal Nix, her small, frail body barely visible through the glass. Jonas didn't have time to hesitate. The first guard appeared at the end of the hall, weapon raised, step away from the console, hands in the air. Jonas acted on instinct. He fired a warning shot at the wall beside them, forcing the guard to dive for cover. Go, he shouted over his shoulder. Keep her safe. Evelyn hesitated. Jonas, don't. No time. Do it. Evelyn's jaw clenched, but she nodded. Without another word, she turned back to the console, working even faster. Jonas turned back just as more guards flooded into the corridor. He gritted his teeth. No way was he letting them get to Nix. He ducked behind the security station, firing a few more warning shots to keep the guards pinned down. His stolen rifle wasn't built for sustained combat, and he knew he wouldn't last long. But he didn't have to win. He just had to stall. Jonas, I'm almost done, Evelyn called. One of the guards rolled out of cover, taking aim. Jonas barely had time to react before a bullet grazed his shoulder, sending a sharp sting through his body. He bit back a curse and returned fire, forcing the guard to retreat. You call that shooting? He shouted, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I've seen rookies with better aim. The guards didn't take the bait. Instead, they started moving in, advancing slowly and methodically. Jonas exhaled. This was bad. Just as he was preparing to make his last stand, a sudden, sharp noise rang through the hall, a deep, electric hum, followed by a wave of static energy. Then the lights flickered. For a brief second, the entire facility went dark. Jonas' heart jumped. What the hell was that? Then the emergency lights kicked in, casting the hallway in a blood-red glow. The guards hesitated, clearly confused. Jonas took the chance. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted back toward the medical bay. "Evelyn, what did you do?" he panted as he reached her. She smirked, wiped the logs, then crashed the system. "We've got about 2 minutes before the backup servers reboot." Jonas let out a breathless chuckle. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." But their relief was short-lived. A low, mechanical hiss filled the air. Jonas turned to the regeneration pod, just in time to see the glass slowly slide open. Nyx stirred inside. Her luminous eyes blinked open, flickering with an eerie, otherworldly glow. And then she moved. Not sluggishly, not weakly. She moved. The frail, broken alien Jonas had carried into this room was gone. In her place stood something different. Something powerful. Nyx stepped out of the pod, her once withered limbs now stronger, more defined. The dull gray of her skin had been replaced by a shimmering, iridescent hue. Energy crackled faintly around her fingertips. Jonas took a step back. "Nyx." She turned to him, tilting her head. Then she lifted a hand, and the guards behind him were lifted off the ground. Jonas whipped around just in time to see them suspended in midair, frozen. The air crackled with raw energy. The guards struggled, eyes wide with terror, but they couldn't move. Nyx stared at them, expression unreadable. Then she spoke. "You hurt him." Jonas' stomach twisted. Her voice was different, stronger. He had never heard her sound like that before. The guards made muffled sounds, their bodies twitching as if caught in an invisible grip. Jonas could see the fear in their eyes. "Nyx," he said carefully, stepping toward her. "It's over. You don't have to do this." She didn't answer. The energy around her hands grew brighter. The air itself seemed to ripple. Jonas swallowed hard. "Nyx, please." She hesitated. For a long moment, the entire room was silent, except for the faint hum of raw power crackling around her. Then, slowly, she lowered her hand. The guards dropped to the ground, gasping for air. Nyx turned to Jonas, her eyes still glowing. "I remember now," she whispered, "who I am." Jonas exhaled, tension draining from his body. "Good. Then let's get the hell out of here." Nyx gave him a small, knowing smile. Agreed. Evelyn was already at the door, scanning for a clear exit. "Security will be on us in 60 seconds. We need to move." Jonas nodded, gripping his rifle. Nyx stepped past him, strong, confident, reborn. The rejected alien no one had wanted. The outcast. The forgotten. Now she was something else entirely. And Jonas had a feeling the entire colony was about to find out exactly what that meant. The cold metal of the facility's corridor pulsed with flickering red emergency lights, casting long, jagged shadows as Jonas, Evelyn, and Nyx ran. Behind them, alarms blared, echoing through the vast complex. The air smelled of ozone and burning circuits, evidence of Evelyn's handiwork in crashing the security systems. Jonas' breath came in short, sharp bursts. His shoulder still ached from the earlier gunshot wound, but he pushed forward, gripping his rifle tightly. Beside him, Evelyn's fingers danced over the holographic interface of her wrist device, scanning for an escape route. But it was Nyx who moved with the most urgency. She wasn't running. She was gliding, her bare feet barely touching the floor. An ethereal glow surrounded her, pulses of energy sparking around her fingertips, as if the power inside her was too much for her body to contain. Jonas stole a glance at her, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who had she been before they found her? What was she now? "Take the left passage," Evelyn shouted, snapping him out of his thoughts. Jonas turned sharply, following her lead as they entered a dimly lit maintenance tunnel. The walls here were tighter, the air thick with dust and neglect. Behind them, the heavy stomp of pursuing guards grew louder. They weren't going to make it. Nyx slowed, turning back toward the direction they came from. "Nyx, keep moving," Jonas barked, but she didn't listen. Instead, she raised a hand. The air around them shifted. A low hum vibrated through the tunnel, followed by a sudden, deafening boom as an invisible force ripped through the walls. The metal warped, bending inward with a sound like shrieking iron, sealing off the tunnel completely. Jonas and Evelyn stumbled from the sheer force of it. Jonas spun, eyes wide. The path behind them was gone. Nyx had collapsed the corridor. Dust settled around them as Nyx lowered her hand, her breathing shallow. Jonas stared at her, stunned. "Did you just?" "I made sure they wouldn't follow," she said simply. Jonas let out a slow breath, shaking his head. He had no idea what she was fully capable of, and he wasn't sure he wanted to find out in a situation worse than this. "We need to keep moving." Evelyn nodded, checking her device. "The ship hangar is just ahead. If we can get to a transport, we're home free." Jonas didn't need to be told twice. He took the lead, pushing forward down the dark passage. They emerged into a massive chamber. Rows of sleek spacecraft lined the hangar, illuminated by the cold, sterile glow of overhead lights. Jonas' heart leaped. They had a chance. Then the speakers crackled to life. "I must admit," a voice said, smooth and sharp like a knife's edge. "I didn't think you'd make it this far." Jonas' stomach dropped. From the far end of the hangar, figures emerged. Not just guards, commanders. He recognized the insignia on their uniforms immediately. These weren't just hired enforcers. These were the people in charge. And at the center of them stood a tall figure in an immaculate black uniform. His silver hair gleamed under the artificial lights, his expression unreadable. Administrator Lorik. Jonas felt his fingers tighten around his rifle. He had heard about Lorik. Everyone had. The man was ruthless, unwavering, and always got what he wanted. Lorik stepped forward, hands behind his back, his cold eyes settling on Nyx. "You should not exist," he said, his voice disturbingly calm. "And yet here you are." Nyx didn't flinch. Lorik tilted his head slightly. "You have no idea what you are, do you?" Nyx remained silent. Lorik exhaled slowly, as if disappointed. "I spent years ensuring that your kind would never resurface. But it seems I was mistaken." Jonas took a step forward. "You're not touching her." Lorik barely spared him a glance. "And you are?" Jonas didn't answer. Lorik sighed. Foolish, but predictable. He motioned slightly with his hand. "Kill them." Jonas barely had time to react before the guards opened fire. Everything happened at once. Jonas and Evelyn dove for cover behind a nearby cargo crate as bullets and plasma blasts rained down. Sparks exploded from the metal around them. Jonas returned fire, but they were outnumbered. Severely. Then Nyx moved. She didn't take cover. She didn't flinch. She walked forward. Jonas' breath caught in his throat. Bullets stopped in midair, hanging frozen before they could reach her. Plasma blasts veered off course as if repelled by an unseen force. The guards hesitated. They were afraid. Nyx raised her hand, and the hangar shook. A pulse of energy rippled outward, knocking the guards off their feet as if gravity itself had momentarily shifted. The ground cracked beneath her. The air around her rippled with unseen power. And then she spoke. Enough. The room froze. Lorik, still standing, narrowed his eyes. Nyx lifted her gaze to him. "You know what I am," she said. "Tell me." Lorik was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't even a smug one. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't. "You are a mistake," he said. "An echo of a species that should have never been allowed to return." Nyx's eyes flashed. Jonas knew that look. Something big was about to happen. And this time, there would be no going back.